Society Matters.
Hello, I'm Doc. Start from the top. I don't want to say doctor. I'm a doctor. I don't want to say it. I say it automatically. Hello, and welcome to HMTV, and I'm your host of Ordinary Heroes. Very excited today to have an incredible guest, an author, somebody who's lived through so much, to tell an incredible story of his family. It started out in Romania and in Hungary and in Austria. It's an incredible story of survival, incredible story of how a family through 3 generations had incredible experiences that have so much to offer in terms of lessons for people today. There's a book that's written by Martin Hausvater. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And what does that name actually mean?
It translates, it's a German name.
Mm-hmm.
It translates to father of the house or house father.
I see. Kind of like in Yiddish, balabusta, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the boss of the house.
Yes. And that's why I chose the name. I thought it was very fitting based on the story being told.
Right. And what inspired you to write this story, this tale about your family that goes back 3 generations?
About 4 years ago, I had a stroke, and I was in pretty bad shape, and I was basically bedridden for about 3 months, and the family was concerned, and as well as friends, I should say, or include. There was a concern about depression because I had problems getting around, and I always needed assistance. And taking, almost 2 dozen pills a few times a day. And the bottom line is that a friend of mine came to the house and said to me that we need to go for a slice of pizza. You got to get outside. I got to get you out of here. So we went for a slice of pizza, and he had asked me about my family story, which I told him. Mm-hmm. And he said, that's a book. You got to write a book. And I'm like, I don't know. And he convinced me to write this book. And the end result is it took me about 3 years.
And it's done. And you're going around telling the story of your grandfather. It all starts with the vision of your grandfather. And it was in Romania, correct? It was 1905?
Yes, that's correct.
Tell us a little bit about that.
My great-grandfather and great-grandmother were Orthodox. My great-grandfather was actually a Orthodox rabbi in his congregation, and they had a large family, about 13 kids, and it
13 children?
Yeah, about
Wow.
13, and there was, just constant. It was all about the poverty.
Yeah.
He didn't have the money, and back then, if you moved a child because you loved the child, to help the child, and you wanted them to do better in life, you put them into an apprenticeship program. Mm-hmm. Today, that would be considered abandonment.
Is that right?
So what happened was...
And all 13 children were put in an apprenticeship program?
No, just the youngest. It was really that bad that when my great-grandmother would make a polenta pie, and she would cut the slices, the kids used to gather around the table just to see which slice was a little bigger that they could grab first.
That's amazing.
And it was a very, very difficult life.
Yeah.
So at the age of 8 years old, my grandfather was taken to Hungary, where he was put into an apprenticeship program with a coppersmith. So he had to learn speak Hungarian. Mm-hmm. And he became part of a family with other boys from different parts of the world that also were, part of the program.
Is that what happened in Europe back in the day? And this is pre-World War I.
Yes.
Where families had a lot of children. Your
Yes.
family was Orthodox. They had a lot of children. And they had no problem releasing some of their kids to other families just to make sure that they're going to survive.
It was a common practice.
Yeah.
And what happened was my grandfather grew up basically learning how to become a coppersmith, but he did, as a child, face a lot of anti-Semitism. He got into a lot of fights at school.
In Hungary?
In Hungary.
Was it Budapest
In Budapest. And what had happened was growing up, he explained to his new family that even though they work on Saturdays, he could not. He could not work Saturdays because, even though there wasn't a synagogue near the house or where he was living, out of respect for the Jewish religion, he was not going to work on Saturdays. But he would make it up on Sundays when they were all in church.
Okay, so he was living with this family, far from his parents. And so they weren't around, actually, to kind of tell him what he should and shouldn't do. And he stayed strict.
Yes.
He was pretty strict with his faith. And he was only, 7, you said?
8 years old.
8 years old, and he was still strict at that age?
And he used to wear a kippah.
Talk about commitment.
Yes. And he used to wear a kippah.
Yeah.
But he got into fights over it. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in the school where, he was going. But the brothers, his new brothers, always were there to assist him.
But that shows you how anti-Semitism was so normalized in Europe well before World War I.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he wound up learning the business. And then, when he became a teenager, now he's working Sundays. And he's starting to sense that what happens if one day this comes to an end and he's got to find his own way. So what he started doing was, because he wasn't going to steal, he wound up taking scraps of metal that were just on the floor that he was supposed to sweep up and throw in the garbage. And he wound up melting them down and making them into little teacups and crosses and saucers and things like that.
Wow.
And selling them.
He was an entrepreneur.
He would pack them in his little bag when he went to school, and after school he would go and sell them to whoever, vendors and so forth, that street vendors and so forth, sell them off. And so he would have some money just in case this whole program came to an end for him.
Right. Smart.
But he was also very, very strong. And he admired the person who owned the coppersmith himself. He admired the way he handled himself and how he was very forceful with people. And he just took a real liking to him. And in addition, the coppersmith had a lot of respect for my grandfather also as a young boy. Look what he's capable of doing. And ultimately, he made him a foreman of a team that would go out and install crosses on church steeples. And one day, there's one of the workers is up there, and they're 150, 200 feet in the air, putting the cross on the steeple. After it's mounted, the person looks down and gets scared and has a panic attack and holds on to the cross. And all the guys are trying to get him down, and he won't come down. And they're all getting frustrated. My grandfather's 14 years old at the time.
What, did they ask him to jump and they were going to catch him? Is that what happened?
Well, they were getting to that point, but they wanted to assist him. And when you get too close to somebody who's panicking like that, it could get dangerous.
Absolutely.
Because they're swinging for you.
Yep.
So my grandfather said, I got this. And he went up on a ladder, and he got about 2-3 feet away from the person. And he said, oh, look at that beautiful bird. Look at that. And the guy turned his head, and he clocked him in the jaw and knocked him out.
Wow.
And then he carried him down the ladder.
One punch, knocked him out.
One punch. That's how strong he was.
Wow.
He had incredible, incredible strength. And then it was time for him to move on, and he joined the cavalry to fight in World War I as part of the Austrian-Hungarian army.
Right.
So his position was within the cavalry. He achieved major, and he had, his men, and they were fighting in Italy in the forest, and they lost total communication with headquarters, and they were trapped and surrounded. My grandfather, they didn't have food. They didn't have food. They were living on grass and bark in the wintertime. They would take snow and melt it down for water. So my grandfather took his horse, said a prayer, sliced the jugular, killed the horse, and then the men cut the horse up to eat it. So they had some meat. And they asked my grandfather to join it, and he wouldn't eat because the horse is not kosher.
Wow. That's an incredible story. It just so happens that my father was also living in a forest during the Holocaust, and he ate bark. And I tell that to people. They say, what do you mean he ate bark? There's a lot of nutrients in bark. It's not great for the stomach.
Right.
But it's if you have to survive, you do what you got to do.
Exactly.
But he made it out. And he ate a horse. He didn't eat a horse, but his friends did.
Well,
did it get to a point where he had no choice?
Soldiers did. His soldiers did. He did it to feed his soldiers.
Right.
And then he got shot. A sniper shot him. And they were taken as POWs. And he was taken to an infirmary in Italy and fixed him up.
Where was he shot?
He was shot in his, I think it was through like the left, almost like the collarbone area.
I see.
And the bullet went through. Didn't kill him.
Okay. Obviously.
And the end result was they took him to an infirmary and they nursed him back. And then he became part of the general population in prison, in the Italian prison. So they brought, some like garbage meat to him to eat. And he asked the guard, is that kosher? I can only eat kosher. The guard said, yes. So he ate it. And the guard laughed at him and said, kosher? What do you think, we're a hotel here? Are you kidding? That was pork you ate.
Oh, God.
So my grandfather walked up to the cell bars.
Right.
Asked the guy to come a little closer.
Okay.
And through the cell bars, he grabbed the officer. He grabbed him with his left hand. He took his right hand, his four fingers, and shoved it down his own throat. And he threw up the meal on top of the officer.
Wow. What a crazy story.
And
who told you these things?
These stories came from my father.
Your father told you.
My grandmother, and my aunt.
And so did you write these stories down, or these are just based on memory?
A combination.
A combination of...
Combination. And a lot of these stories were told to me over and over again.
I understand. So you knew them pretty well.
Yes.
And so you had to put it on paper.
Eventually, I put it on paper. And before my father died, I went down to Florida and...
Right. But he had some chutzpah to throw up on the guard, because the guard could have shot him.
Absolutely. He didn't care. And then there were anti-Semitic fights that took place in the yards. Killed a Jew, so to speak. Wow. And his own men, who weren't Jewish, came to his rescue. After the war...
He was liked.
Yeah, he was liked by his own men.
Yeah.
He did what he had to do. After the war, they were released, and one of his men asked him to accompany him to go to Czechoslovakia. That's where his man lived. His name was Elias. So the two of them went to Czechoslovakia, which is quite the distance. And they lived for a little while with Elias's family on a farm. And then Elias's sister introduced my grandfather to my grandmother on a blind date in shul on a Shabbat, like an Onik Shabbat. And they met. They eventually got married. My grandfather moved in with his in-laws now, and they, my grandmother's father as well was an Orthodox rabbi. And through his congregation, a member offered to put my grandfather to work in a milk can factory. Not the ideal situation that he wanted, to be on an assembly line.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, he took the job because it was money, and he wound up working, and he met a few people, and they told him about something that was happening back in Hungary, which was the currency was being devalued.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an opportunity here. So in other words, let's say you had a $100 bill. It was now worth $30. But if you paid the Hungarian government $20, it would be worth $80. So what my grandfather did was, knowing how to work with metal, he made his own stamp. And he charged half the price.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, he has this whole thing working, but working for Czechoslovakia, it wasn't going to be that easy. So he wound up moving my grandmother rather, and my aunt, who was born at the time, to Hungary. My father wasn't born yet. This is in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And they rented a house, and in the basement, my grandfather would press money, the stamps.
I see.
People would give him money, and then he would stamp it and then give back to them. And he was worth a lot of money. Ultimately, he almost got caught by the police. He saw them coming from a distance through a window, and he had red ink all over him. So what do? You can't just wash it off. So what he did was he found a can of red paint, and he poured it all over himself. And he took off his shoes, he poured it all over his shoes, and took a paintbrush and started making it look like his shoes were being painted. And he was in socks. The red paint was all over him. Now the doorbell rings, it's the police. And he answers the door, and they're like, what happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I was painting my shoes, and you startled me, and I got red paint all over me. The can fell.
Oh, God. What a story. And he was Orthodox.
Yes.
And he was thinking like this, breaking
Yes.
the law.
Yes.
But he did what he had to do to survive.
That's exactly what it was about.
Yeah.
It was all about survival.
I get it. Everybody has their own strategy.
Exactly.
This was his. He was an entrepreneur. He was innovative. And this is... let's move to Brooklyn, since we're short on time. So
Okay.
Tell me when he moved to Brooklyn.
So in 1938, he was part of the Jewish underground,
Mm-hmm.
and he had killed a few Nazis in a riot that took place in Vienna. And he escaped, and he escaped to Liverpool. My grandmother took their money, donated it to the Jewish underground to save lives, to pay off Nazi guards, to maybe let people go, to buy food, and smuggle it into the forest for people who needed food. Just anything they wanted, anything they felt they had to do with the money, they did, as well as buy arms to arm the rest of the underground.
Yeah.
So they donated the money, which at the time was the equivalent in today's money of about $120 million. Wow. So it was quite substantial.
Yes.
You think about how many lives that could have saved.
Right.
Well, what happened was my grandfather had a journey to get from Vienna to Hungary to Paris to London to Liverpool, because he met up with mobsters in England called the Yiddishers.
These are Jewish mobsters.
These are Jewish mobsters, yes.
Who knew? They were tough?
They were.
They were tough.
They were tough.
Okay. To be a mobster, you got to be a little tough.
They were like the equivalent of the Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel.
In England.
So, in England.
Yeah.
So they went to, he eventually came over from Liverpool, and my grandmother, my father, and my aunt needed to get out as well, because the family was marked for death. And it was only by chance that my grandmother found out about it. She was coming out of a market, and she was thrown to the ground by a Gestapo officer with a bunch of other women. And the logo of the Black Iron Cross of Austria was on the sidewalk, and they wanted these women to get rid of it, scrape it off with their fingernails. And a SS officer was walking by, a captain, and saw my grandmother on the ground. and said to the Gestapo officer, I want that woman for myself. And the end result is she got up, and when they were a few blocks away, he said, I'm a friend of your husband's. Go, leave, the family's marked for death.
Mm-hmm.
So she made the deal with the Jewish underground, and she got the family out of Hamburg, Germany, and then they went to Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather knew how to work with metal. He went into the sheet metal business, and ultimately, two mobsters come into his shop one day and say to him, we could take you to the next level. We could help you. And
he agreed.
And he agreed.
Mm-hmm.
And then my father...
He wasn't afraid of them.
No. And then he wasn't afraid of anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Then my father started to grow into the business, and my father joined the Navy, where he faced a lot of anti-Semitism and used to get into fights. A naval ship, how high is a naval ship? 30, 40 feet for the top deck. My father was sent up on a hot day to mop the deck by an anti-Semitic officer in the Navy. And then the two other men were sent up to follow him and start with him and start a fight with him. So they started with the, Jew this, Jew that, and a lot of slang and so forth. My father had enough, and he grabbed one of them, and he threw him off the side of the ship.
Wow.
With 30, 40 feet in the air.
Wow.
Threw him off the side of the ship into the ocean. They had to fish the guy out.
Did he get in trouble for that?
He got in trouble, but he didn't care.
Yeah.
He didn't care. He actually met somebody while he was in jail cell who ran the commissary who was Jewish. And so
your father was tough too?
Oh, yes.
And what about you? What did you have to go through in life where you had to toughen up?
Well, being here in America, we didn't have anti-Semitism growing up the way they did in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It came later on. There was a period when the neo-Nazis were going to be marching in Skokie in the late 70s.
Right.
Okay. My father came home one day with baseball bats. And my mother, I had to actually ask my brother and sister to make sure I remember the story correctly, and I did. My mother asked him, what are you doing with all these bats? Why are you taking a suitcase? Mm-hmm. He said, I'm going to Chicago with, and then he called out friends' names, Tony and Richie and this one and that one.
Mm-hmm.
No Nazi is going to march in this country. Wow. It's never going to happen.
Wow.
My kids are not going to see what I had to see. And he was prepared to go. My mother broke down crying, you'll get killed, you go to jail. He didn't care. And the result was the Nazis didn't get a permit, so they couldn't march.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It was canceled.
It was canceled.
That's right.
But he was ready to go.
Wow. It's just incredible that, we see the Jewish community as kind of weak and not resisting. But there were a lot of Jews that resisted in World War II and during the Holocaust, and even here in the United States, when anti-Semitism reached a peak, and now it's reaching another peak. So this is kind of testing the mettle of a lot of Jews in this country.
Absolutely.
And I think this story is very valid today because we kind of have to toughen up to stand up against anti-Semitism and push back because it's unacceptable in this country. This is not Nazi Germany.
You're 100% right. And also what people have to realize is the value of Israel. Back in the 30s and 40s, if we had an Israel, the Holocaust may not have taken place.
Yeah.
All the Jews would have had a homeland.
Yes.
Now we have a homeland, but it's taken for granted. And that was one of the things that my father and my grandfather were very, very, had strong beliefs that Israel is very, very, very important. It must survive.
It is. I am Israeli born, and I can relate to that, and I understand, and I'm proud to be Israeli. I'm proud to be an American, proud to be both. And you're right, we do have a homeland, and it makes us feel good that we have a place to go. And people don't understand that. It's such a tiny little plot of land. That's the other thing that's so ironic, and yet many people want to see us give it up. It's like, and where are we going to go then? I mean, this is a homeland that we've had for thousands of years. We were indigenous to the land of Judea, where the word Judaism come from. That's where it came from. So, but your book, let me hold up this right here. So this book, Hausvater, is available on Amazon, I'm assuming?
On Amazon Kindle right now, and it will be in hardcover in about a week.
Oh, very good, very good. And I'm sure there's a lot more that we haven't touched upon.
That's correct.
But really, overall, would you agree with me, and is there anything you want to add to it, is that every Jewish family had to find a way to survive. And your grandfather, your father, and yourself had to figure it out. And whatever it is that you had to do, you toughened up. You had a vision of survival, and you had to be innovative. And so did your grandfather and your father. And you're here today to talk about it.
Yes.
It's a wonderful story.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you coming in. Is there anything you want to add to my overall description of your story?
No, I think you covered it all. I think that it would have been a real, if my father was around, my grandfather was around, these protesters, they would have reacted a little differently.
Mm-hmm. There would have been a lot of baseball bats.
Exactly.
What do they call those? Torpedo bats?
Right.
That would have been sold.
Bats. Yes. And they wouldn't even think twice.
Yeah, you see, that's a different approach. It's a violent approach. I think most of us agree that it's not the way to go about it in this country. But that's what some people had to do. And you know what? They survived. Yes. And they made sure other people survived. And that's sometimes, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But that's not where we're professing here. But sometimes it's just...
Sometimes it's needed.
Sometimes it's needed, and you have to have a forceful hand. Wasn't it Winston Churchill that said, speak softly, but carry a big stick? And I think that's a very strong and powerful message. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here today on HMTV on our series, Ordinary Heroes. And we had quite a heroic story here today. And I appreciate Martin Hausvater for joining us, and follow us on all the major social media platforms as well as the podcast platforms. Look for HMTV, and we'll see you soon.